So I guess we can maybe start slowly, and I'll speak for another minute or two, so people will just miss me, which is not that dramatic. So I welcome everyone. I am incredibly excited about that webinar series. To me personally, it is the most exciting webinar series that I have been able to take a part of in YSI. For various reasons. And what we will do here is that we will address three questions or that the Pope put forward to us as the YSI community, the Young Scholars Initiative, which is a part of the Institute for New Economic Thinking. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, it's a huge global community of young scholars that challenge conventional wisdom in economics. And I think for most of us who have been engaging with it continuously, sometimes more, sometimes less, depending on our workload, I think the personal and social bonds that you create with the others really do give you a deep sense of community and belonging. So it is more than just an intellectual home. And we are doing that together with the Economy of Francesco. Obviously, this is, one of the great collaborations that we will hopefully also be able to continue in the future. I don't want to lose too many words. So in case for the whole project descriptions, you can check, or if you want to see the whole project description, you can check it out on the INET website. What we will be talking about today is the first question that the Pope put forward, which is, if the origin of the world economy refers to the administration of household goods, one might ask, who today administers the goods of our common home? So this is the big theme of today. And in the next session, we'll be talking about the rules that are required to put the administration of household goods at the service of fragility. And then third and finally, we will discuss the question of what place does the economic system give to uselessness, that is to beauty, which I think is a very challenging question further down the road. But today we will discuss the first question only, and we have three incredible guests with us, plus the president of INET, who will give an introduction in a minute. But let me just introduce the guests to you briefly. We will have Rabbi Sergio Bergman with us, who is the former Minister of Environment and Sustainable Development of Argentina, and currently the president of the World Union for Progressive Judaism. He graduated from the Faculty of Pharmacy and Biochemistry at the University of Buenos Aires, and he's providing with his research a modern perspective of integral ecology from an ecumenical political view. And next, we have Sister Helen Alford, who graduated in manufacturing engineering at the University of Cambridge, where she was also awarded a PhD, which I think is terrific, because I am always happy to meet hard sort of scientists who also happen to be Christian, especially when we think of the conflict, and that also applies, of course, to Rabbi Sergio, when we think about the conflict of religion and science, which, many of those hard scientists actually say doesn't really exist. But anyway, she's a religious sister of the Dominican Sisters of St. Catherine of Siena. She has taught subjects related to economic ethics and the history of Christian social thought at several universities. And she has also served as a consultant to the Pontifical Council for Justice and Peace, and is currently vice rector of the Pontifical University of St. Thomas Aquinas in Rome. And she's authored numerous publications on management theory and CSR. So enough of me. I would like to pass on the word to our dear President, Rob Johnson, to introduce that incredible webinar series. Thank you, Rob, for being with us.
Muted. I'm sorry. Thank you, Patrick, and thank you, everyone. It's lovely to be here with you. You'll see in the background of my picture is a statue that is the landmark of the city of Detroit, where I grew up. It's called the Spirit of Detroit, and it has a little adage associated with it from the book of Corinthians, which reads, "Now the Lord is that Spirit, and where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty." Well, in my experience, the economics profession has often suggested that it was the religion of liberty. But the contradictions between the experiences that we've all had inspired me to look in what you might call the directions of arts, poetry, and spirit. And I had the very good fortune through Martin Guzman, who's now the economy minister of Argentina, and a former postdoc working under Joseph Stiglitz on behalf of INET, to meet with the Scholas Occurrentes group, and to meet first in Rome and then in Assisi with the Pope and his team, and explore how to, which you might call, enlarge our awareness and look at the contradictions between the models of prosperity and goodness identified by which you might call orthodox economics, and trying to understand how we could move beyond. In the context of those meetings, I was very moved by Pope Francis, who advocated that many people on this planet do not have the opportunity to go to college. And many countries advocate, at least symbolically, that they should be democracies and serving the people. And his concern was that if the education was an indoctrination rather than illumination of the challenges of your life, people would be discouraged, even at the level of high school. We would not educate and we would not inspire citizens, and our systems of governance would fail. He recommended a very interesting pathway. And the pathway started with listening, respecting the young people, and learning what they wanted. I had just come with my two young daughters a couple of months before that from the climate strike in New York City. And I watched these little girls, then 9 and 6, invigorated by the awareness that those events, which you might call, implanted into their minds, some of which was dread and fear. My daughter actually wrote a poem that the Pope has read in many instances about her fear that things were not coherent. But as we went on, and the Pope inspired the listening, we read his encyclicals, and the most recent one, Fratelli Tutti, about common good, seems to play into a place where I'm actually now seeing young people, just a little older than you are, like Robert Akerlof, son of George Akerlof, the famous Nobel laureate, who's writing about identities, norms, and narratives. To use our simple model of economics, the preferences, the desires that make a utility function and are transformed into demand and served by the market are not ice. They are social constructs. They are things that interact with the structure of society, governance, administration, etc. And as I see people like him making progress on the formal side, I see a social leadership of Pope Francis that I find truly remarkable. In that context, INET has worked, whether myself or Joseph Stiglitz or Jeffrey Sachs, who's aligned and someone who grew up in Detroit a couple, 3 years ahead of me, and many other scholars, Danny Roderick, etc. And we have been inspired by the Pope and building a commission on global economic transformation. We are seeing, as Muhammad Ali said in his famous brief poem, me, we are seeing more of the we and less of the me in our vision of what the pandemic, climate change, and others have put on our screen and asked us to embrace the challenge for the good of humankind. On November 4th last year, a very dynamic global plenary, virtual, was run by the Young Scholars Initiative, and the Pope's team at Scholas submitted the 3 questions, of which the first is your centerpiece today, and the other 2 will be in the subsequent episodes, as I understand. When I was asked to comment about the Pope's most recent encyclical, Fratelli Tutti, I did, as is often my custom, coming from Detroit, I reached to the music. But I chose a man from Philadelphia, whose name is Teddy Pendergrass, a man who had a remarkable recovery, and I played a role in a group that managed his career after he had been in a car accident and become quadriplegic. But one of Teddy's most famous songs is called Wake Up, Everybody. And the lyric that reminded me of the role that Pope Francis has played vis-a-vis the social sciences is captured in the 2nd verse. Wake up, all the teachers, time to teach a new way. Maybe then they'll listen to what you have to say. 'Cause they're the ones who are coming up, and the world is in their hands. When you teach the children, teach them the very best you can. And as I concluded in the brochure that I contributed to with many other scholars, I said, after reading these beautiful offerings by the Pope, I can say the teachers who study the encyclicals will impart insights to their students that are the very best you can. I look forward to hearing your explorations and your work, and I must say, I congratulate you for having an excellent compass and picking this theme and this series to carry us forward. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Rob. Truly terrific. As always, your engagement with YSI and your integrity and your passion to move something and to make this place a better world. So we will go into the interventions now of our esteemed guests. I just mentioned, or I forgot to mention earlier, that Professor Ugo Mattei will join us later. He's a professor of law at the University of Turin, has written numerous books on the commons, for which he's been awarded many prizes. I will introduce him later on. But now I would like to pass on the word to Rabbi Sergio Bergman, who will share his thoughts on the first question.
Hello, everyone. Shalom, salam, shanti, la paz para todos ustedes. I really appreciate the opportunity to share with all of you this amazing, really challenge. First of all, to face one of the more important questions about the common goods and how the humankind can really live like an extended family in our common house that is this planet. The second one is really that young people, like the Pope teaches, need to make some noise, and they need, and you need, to move forward without the skepticism about the adults, and really to try to change the world to do it a better place. This is really one of the more important commitments of our common spiritual legacy. We need to make here in the heart a place that is more close to even, and to live sharing values. Different traditions and religions, we are saying exactly the same in different ways. But if we really believe that we have only one God, that is our Father in heaven, the logical consequence is that we are brothers and sisters. That means that we are only one family in only one common house. To the question, I am a student, a disciple of my teacher and my rabbi, Jorge Bergoglio, that became the Pope Francis. But you know, every time that I met him, I listened to him, I am really meeting again the guy that I know in Buenos Aires. He don't change. He grow up. He's really faithful to the source and the roots of the Catholic Church tradition, but anytime, in any place, with his open mind, he offered to all the humankind an universal message. And this question is a universal one. And the answer is not only some particular answer. This is a universal challenge. And I'm really so glad that you opened this forum to interchange, to have some interreligious dialogue, interdisciplinary dialogue, and to lead us not to be right, first of all, to be smart. If we don't answer this question, we take a huge risk about our future. My inspiration is not only my rabbi teacher, Pope Francis. My inspiration is the documents that really he shared with us. For me, when I really became the Minister of Environment in Argentina, I take Laudato Si, like my guidelines. To attempt, because really I don't try to change not the world and not the politics, but to do my major effort to make a contribution. And you know, the funny thing is that I really believe that to become a Minister of Environment is part of my commitment like a rabbi. Because I really believe that good politics are a spiritual task. And inspired by Pope Francis, I wrote a book that I shared in the beginning of our conversation with here our fellows, A Gospel According Francis. And I shared there are three dimensions that can lead us to some way to the answer of the first question, that is Bergoglio, Francis now, like a teacher, like a leader, and like a statesman. The three dimensions are, for me, the way that we can really answer the question. What we can really learn from our teachers. The economy and the market is leading the common goods of humankind. I am not really saying that capitalism or communism are solutions. I am saying that can be that the market make the decisions without taking in account that we need to move from linear economy to circular economy. I mean with circular economy, not only to recycle raw materials. Circular economy is the economy that have triple impact. We are not only looking for profit, we need to take care about the three dimensions: the economical dimension, the environment dimension, and the social dimension. We need to change the way that we produce. We need to change the way that we expose people, needed and poor people outside the system. And we need to take care about the common house, taking care about the impact of our goods and the economical market. All the time that the market is leading us in the linear economy, we will have more poor people, more exclusion, and we will have really a serious damage to the environment. I will take care about how we can change and move, maybe with one of the things that Pope Francis really support in 2015, that is the 2030 agenda from sustainable development. I really believe that the 17 goals of sustainable development are a very good guideline for us to recheck how we are managing the goods and the well-being from humankind. I really don't want to extend my participation only. I think that there are some ideas. I don't really try to have an answer or a solution, but maybe to share with you some of my beliefs and encourage you to really improve ourselves. Really, we can tell you because you are young, you can do what we don't attempt to start. We can tell you that you can continue our effort. And I really believe in this kind of intergenerational partnership. Good luck to all of you. Thank you so much for inviting me. And I am open to the following discussion.
Thank you very much for your intervention. A lot of thought-provoking points that you raised. I think in particular the point that we are all brothers and sisters on this earth, regardless of our faith, religion, ethnicity, whatever you may call that, is one which is as up to date as it probably as it always has been, but one that we need to be particularly reminded of in these times. I would like to pass on the word now to Reverend Sister Helen Alford, please, to share her thoughts and also maybe refer to some of the points that she just heard.
Thank you very much, Patrick, and all the organizers, and for all of you here, because it's great to be able to talk about such an important topic so early in the new year. It's a great sign of hope for us for the year ahead, which we know, of course, will lead, for those of you involved in the economy of Francesco, to the big meeting in Assisi. And we hope that will give another big injection of energy into all these movements to try to rethink things which are led by the young people. And so it's great for us older people. I join Rabbi Sergio in being really happy to be part of this, where the young people are so important to break through things that our generation has not been able to break through. So I wanted to say a few things. The first thing was about the model of the home, because as you know, Pope Francis in Laudato Si starts off, and this is why I think we're having this discussion today and why he put the question in the way he did, starts off Laudato Si with the subtitle, Care of Our Common Home. Of course, in English, not every language has this, but in English, we have distinction between house and home. So home is a particularly warm image for the English speakers. It includes the house, but it goes beyond the house. It's just as much about the relationships which are protected and nurtured in that house as it is about the building. And I've always thought about this image as really, really powerful and really important as something to reflect on and to sort of create a background for our thinking. But what this question from Pope Francis did for me, and I felt a bit challenged by it, I have to say, was to make me think, what do we do with this idea in terms of much more practical economic questions? And in fact, he puts two quite key questions, which we'll come to. And this made me think all about the idea of metaphors and models. And I just wanted to say something about this at the beginning, because I think these kinds of literary things or artistic images, they are very, very powerful for people who, like me, are engineers or technical people. Often really important technical breakthroughs start with people having an idea that they're given from culture, from art, from religion, somewhere outside the technical field, comes in and inspires people to start working on something. So I think it's quite important point, and you might want to come back to this in your discussions. The two things I want to say is from personal experience, because I think often that can really connect with people. So I want to mention two personal experiences of when somebody has used a model which to me really struck me or shook me a bit. And the first experience is when I was a teenager in the UK, when Mrs. Thatcher became Prime Minister. So I was like you, a young person like you, in Britain in the Thatcher years. And I saw what happened to the country as a result of this experience. Well, I won't go into it in all details. There could be a lot of things that could be said about it. But one of the things that happened in that period is that Mrs. Thatcher and her thinking tried to apply a customer-supplier relationship to every kind of social situation that we were in. And you really saw it in terms of the language. For instance, the health service, of course, a big employer, a big part of the economy. Before, we had been patients in the health service, okay? More and more, you started to hear people talking about us as customers in the health service, and the doctors were the service providers, they were the suppliers and we were the customers. And in schools, pupils started to be called customers and teachers were the suppliers, So you start to see this model being used everywhere. And it was like this sort of monolithic model got applied across all the diversity of human sociality, and all the relationships got gradually explained in this limited way, supplier, customer. And it still grates me when I go home. When I go home now, I live in Rome, but when I go back to UK, I fly into the airport, and then the next thing I do is get on a train. And when you go down to the station, you hear people saying on the announcements, will customers for London Bridge go to this platform? And will the customers for Victoria go to another platform? Whereas when I was a child, we used to be called passengers when we got on a train. Now, no, that language is not used anymore. So I really value diversity of models. I think we need a lot of different models to help. It's a bit like biodiversity. We need a kind of social diversity, different models for different circumstances. So when I read, the common home in an economic thing, it sort of struck me. First of all, my first reaction was, oh no, I don't just want one model imposed here that takes away the diversity of all the different things, even though, of course, that's not what Pope Francis is trying to do. But, I'm just explaining to you my reactions that might be helpful. You might want to share your reactions too. The second experience I had, which I was really reminded of when I read this about the common home in the economy, was about 20 years ago. I was a dean of the faculty. So people used to come in to me, and at that time we had a lot of students with a lot of financial problems. I mean, they still have financial problems, but we have a more organized structure for helping them now. At that time we didn't. So they come in and talk to me. So I remember this student came in, he sat in front of me. His name was Isang, and he was explaining to me about how he'd had some operations and he needed some financial help. So I said to Isang, look, I don't know if I can help you. I'll try, but I don't have a lot of possibility. And he said to me, but you're my mother. And I always remember him saying this to me. It was like, what are you saying? You're my mother. And I realized this was his model. His model was the family model, and it was impossible for him to hear this from the person who he thought in the structure that we were in now was his mother, So, you know, I don't remember what happened subsequently. I don't remember how we resolved the problem, but I remember him saying that to me. And, you know, on one hand, I could say that was quite a challenge to me, because he was basically saying, you know, we belong to each other somehow, and you should be helping me, you know. On the other hand, I felt a little bit manipulated by that, you know. So I think that this image of the model of the home is really, really important. I find it very inspiring. But when I start to think of it, applying it to the economy, I start to think we need to keep this with other models. And I'll come back to that at the end, because I think it comes back to the interdisciplinary point that Rabbi Sergio mentioned in his first comments. So anyhow, that's the first thing about the home. So then the first question that the Pope asks us, you know, he says, if the origin of the word economy refers to the administration of household goods, so the economy is relating to the home, one might ask, who today administers the goods of our common home? Okay, who today administers the goods of our common home? So the first thing this made me think of is the use of that word administers, because we do use this word in English in things like MBA, Master of Business Administration, and things like that. But usually the language that we use in English for talking about the way economies run is one to do with executives. You know, you have a chief executive, you have a chief executive officer, you have the executive doing things. And it's this sense of a kind of almost like a machine kind of thing, with the rules coming down from the top, the orders coming down from the top. Whereas the idea of administrator, I mean, in Italian, and this is, I'm sure this is influencing Pope Francis in the way he's thinking, you know, the top guy isn't the chief executive, he's the amministratore delegato. So he's the delegated administrator. It's quite a different idea that we have here. So my first idea, reflection on this, is to talk about things in terms of administration is I think quite an interesting language, especially for the English speakers, of course, the dominant language in the world of economics today. You know, it's not just me and my decision and my power, but I'm administering things that belong to other people, you know. So I'm a kind of a servant in that sense, even if I am at the top of the organization, you know. So then the next thing I would say about that is, if we think about who are the people who are administering, you know, I'd say we basically can think about two parts of the economy, the real economy and the financial economy. Okay, and we have administration going on in both of those things. You know, this real economy would be much closer to the ancient idea about the common home and about the oikos, you know, that was Aristotle's idea that the oikonomia was associated with the family administration, the real administration. So this whole financial part of the economy would, you know, unfortunately be much more easily connected, and I think often does work like this, with what he would call crematistics from Aristotle, which is this kind of searching for money for its own sake, not because it's supporting the life of the home, but it becomes a goal in its own right, and then becomes a kind of a cancer. You know, as we know, money is a good servant, but a bad master. And it's really important that we spend time generating economic goods that we need. We could think of those, you know, if we think about the common home, the economic goods are kind of like the foundation of the home. If we don't have enough economic goods, we see communities collapsing, you know, and most of the migration push today, people leaving their homes, and if you talk to most of them, they don't want to do it, leaving their homes because there isn't enough of these goods, and they could see where especially their children could grow up. You know, we all know that now the most powerful, the most influential predictor for how much access you have to economic goods and how many life choices you have based on that is the country in which you're born. That's the biggest indicator. So it's not surprising that people aren't stupid. They know that. So they want to go to a place where they get more chance to have economic goods. So, having enough economic goods is a really important ethical question that we really want to confront in countries where there isn't enough of it. They do form the kind of basis of the good home. But they are only the foundation. The foundation is there for the house. The house is all the goods to do with human development and our environmental sustainability and all the things that have value in themselves, as we know. The last thing I'd say then in regard to that question, and I'm sure many of you can say really other interesting things about this, is the question about shareholder model and stakeholder model, this distinction between these two kinds of models that has developed in economic thinking, so that the shareholder is where you're administering the goods of a business or an organization for those who've put the money into it, the people who own a share in it. And the stakeholder model would say, well, the shareholders are part of that, but they're not the only stakeholder. And we should be managing this organization, this business, also for the other stakeholders. And I think that's obviously a more interesting model, the stakeholder model, but it doesn't really get beyond the problem that I think the second question of Pope Francis is trying to push us towards. And that's why I'm mentioning it now, to help us move to the last question. And I can say my last points. The last question was, what bond unites those who administer those assets and those whose assets are administered? In English, bond is a very strong word. We have phrases like, my word is my bond, and that sort of thing you say to people when you really want to promise them something profound. We talk about a marriage bond, things like this. It's a strong word to do with a relationship. And the stakeholder model is good in the sense that it's trying to expand the number of people that we're administering this institution for, but it's still seeing them all as individuals. A stakeholder is a person who has a stake. It's like the game of poker. You have something to lose. You put your money in and you get something out of it then. But what kind of relationship do you have with the others? Well, more or less a win-lose relationship. If I win, they lose kind of thing. So this idea of the bond binding us together, it's a bit hard to get into a stakeholder model, showing that we need to go a bit beyond this to some kind of deeper model in which the bonds are important. And I think this is pushing us in economic thinking. It would be really interesting to hear what Professor Mattei has to say about this, to reevaluating the relationship between cooperation and competition. If you think about, I think the best model for this that we have, but some of you might come up with an even more interesting one, but a very good model anyway, is the game model. The game model, because competition in a game, if it's played properly, if there's sportsmanship, if there isn't foul play and this kind of thing, so if it's really functioning properly, the competition helps us improve. Everybody improves because of the competition. It isn't so much about excluding people, it's about everybody getting better. And the cooperation side of things is having a shared way of playing that game. And that's two things, basically: the rules of the game, so it's the basic principles that we're all agreed on, and then the sorts of ways which we agree are good ways to play this game. So we're talking about best practice, we're talking about skills, we're talking about the way we develop strategies together, these kinds of things. And I think that's a crucial part of this, bringing in this sense of the bond, of the community being part of a relationship as integral to our administering of goods for the sake of the common home. So the last thing I would say on this is coming back to the first point about the home, really, and picking up again Rabbi Sergio's point about importance of interdisciplinary thinking. I think the idea of the home is a beautiful thing in terms of sort of an overall imagery, because we need an integral model. That's the thing we don't have right now. We have all kinds of experts who can tell us quite specific things in quite deep ways, but we don't know how to put those things together in an integral model. We saw that in the pandemic. You know, many people in the pandemic are getting fed up with what experts say, because we've got the biological experts and the medical experts saying some things, then we've got the economic experts and the policy experts saying other things, we've got the security people saying other things, and they don't know how to put these things together to get an integrated model that can really put the good of human life and a sustainable relationship with the world that we live in at the center. We're moving towards it, but it's very, very incomplete, and we don't experience it fully yet. So the idea of the house there that can hold together these different expertise, this plurality, so that we get this integral vision without losing the diversity, you know, those different models that we were talking about, the different strengths of the different disciplines, interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary. We have the strength of the specialization, but we have this integral vision, the home holding us together. I think that's something so powerful and important. And as I said at the beginning, you young people, you've got lots of technical skills. If you could be inspired by an image like the house holding together this diversity, looking for that integral vision without sacrificing expertise and specialist skills, you'll be able to find it. You'll find it because you want to, and you'll have the courage to go in that direction. So those are my last words. I hope I didn't speak too long. Sorry if I did.
No, you didn't. Thanks a million for both interventions. They were great. And especially to economists, I think, speaking of models and the way in which you discerned it in terms of the language, I think this is also something which is incredibly interesting. Before we go into the Q&A, I would just like to ask Rabbi Sergio if he would like to share briefly his thoughts, and then we would go into the Q&A session.
After I listen careful about what Sister Helen said, I need to only add one word: Amen.
Wonderful, wonderful. All right, so we can go into the questions. I think you can just raise your arm. I should see it here on the screen. And while you do that, I can read the first question from Mateusz. He can't unmute himself, but he had a question to you, Sergio Bergman. How do you see this intergenerational cooperation happening? What do we do well already? What is missing, and what should be our priority? So yeah, a question I think that you could hold a seminar on, but yeah, just
Patrick,
share your...
Patrick, you have on the chat my answer.
Oh, perfect. Oh, I just saw it. Sorry. Okay, so we have that. Then I can pass on the word to Georgette, who's holding up her hand.
Hi, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay, perfect. Thank you, everybody. And my question is especially for Helen. Thank you very much, sister. And my background is in economics, so I couldn't be silent about this. And I think, like you, that a lot of models are necessary, not just to stick to one. But I think studying economics, I've faced a huge frustration because there have been some developments of new economic models, but in, like, for example, game theory or behavioral economics or evolutionary economics and some other type of heterodox type economics. But when you actually look at them, they're still applying the same mentality. So the values that are used within the models are the same as the other ones, which is utilitarianism, atomistic behavior, and seeing the economy as a house and not as a home. So even when you were saying games, it's about cooperation, but when they actually do the models of strategic interactions, it's always based on reward and punishment. So it's really not as a win-win situation, it's more like a zero-sum game. So I think my challenge is, like, even I'm doing my PhD now, and I always have this frustration if I say, why can't I change this assumption? Because they just don't accept it, you know? So there's, I think, like, I guess my question to you would be, what do you recommend for us to actually make this change? Whereas when we have the tools, but the same normativity as before is applied, the values have not changed. So you have different models, but the same bad values or bad assumptions. So the outcome is the same.
Okay, thank you very much, Georgette. It's a really important question. I think we are still struggling with this because one of the things that we're not sure how to do, even if we can do it, I think, is how to model in a mathematical way relationships that are not just transactional. Now, maybe there are some people here who can say something about that. I haven't looked at it enough myself to be able to answer it. The way I can answer your question is to say, I think often changes occur on the lived experience level before they can occur on the theory level. And I think we need to see a lot more activity at the level of enterprises, at the level of businesses, of people trying to set themselves an objective, a purpose. There's a lot of discussion, as you probably know now, in the business literature about purpose. Used to talk about mission, which, you know, as a word is, I think, even more inspiring word, but that word's been emptied of its meaning because of the way in which it was used. So now we talk about purpose. Okay, let's hope purpose isn't emptied of its meaning in the same way. That they can think about promoting human dignity. You know, one of the things I often say to people, you know, I'm an engineer and I did this PhD on human-centered technology. Okay, I think if you give engineers the goal to try to promote human dignity, they will try to do it. They will find ways to do it. The trouble is they are usually put in economic systems where that's not what they are told to do. You know, the classic example for me is something like Facebook or Google. There's a wonderful book called Stand Out of Our Light, which is written by a former Google engineer. I can put it in the chat afterwards, who went off to study philosophy because he just got fed up with what he was being asked to do. And you could see, I mean, as he said, I joined Google because I wanted to be a good engineer and grow and develop and understand and learn and be part of interesting things. And I ended up doing something which I could see was really damaging other human beings, just so we could make money, you know? And I suppose in Facebook, it's even clearer now. And I'm just sure if Facebook or Google could have the guts and the will to say to their engineers, we want you to make money for us. We need to make money. We're a business, but find a way to do it that promotes human dignity. Those engineers would do it. They would find a way to do it. You know, they could do it, but they're just not allowed to. They're stopped from doing it. And I think if we could get more experiences like this, we can start to then, the economists can start to theorize about it, but I think they need something to work with. We have social enterprise right now, that's true. We do have some, so I'm not saying maybe there is more we can do on the economic level, and there are economists here who might be able to say more about that. But I also think we just need more practical experiences of just showing this bond, showing this relationship, showing human dignity, showing that promoting the common good is really effective, economically, humanly, sustainable, you know, this kind of thing. And then maybe we can find a way to theorize about it better.
Wonderful, thanks. There is another hand up. Sedgwick, feel free to go ahead. Introduce yourself maybe briefly, just 1 or 2 sentences if you want.
My name is Shatvik. I'm a research fellow at the National Law School in India. I work on land issues, land valuation, etc. So my question is, I was reading these 3 questions. Please excuse me because maybe I'm mixing up the background. So when I read the question, it seems that the question is what it is happening now instead of what it should be. So the second and the third question is what should be. And the first question is, if it is home, then who is managing? And if I am understanding correctly, I might be wrong. If I am understanding correctly, if Papa Francis is asking what is happening now, then should we also talk about the elephant in the room, which is the rich and the powerful, who Adam Smith called them master of mankind. So should we talk about them and say that it is the rich and the powerful who is controlling the majority stake, depending on the state laws, controlling the decisions of the company. It's not the shareholder. Like me, I own a share of a company. It's a few $100. I don't change a little thing in this operation of a company. So I was asking, is there any, is there something I'm making, I'm mistaking here? Yeah, thank you.
I don't know if I should answer, or if Rabbi or someone else. I mean, I could just say, when I saw that question, I can sympathize with your point, Satwik, because it made me think about a book I got about 20 years ago called Who Owns What in Britain? And it was a great big fat book like this. And it started off with the Queen, the Anglican Church, and it just went on from there. And it was a really, really good book, and I learned a heck of a lot reading. So in a way, I felt like, well, we're going to have a kind of first discussion today. We've got 15 minutes, each of us. But in a way, really, to deal with this question, we'd have to have a good analysis of where the power is in the economy, who's controlling what, who has access to what resources, all this kind of thing. So I think your question is really good. And maybe in the future, Young Scholars Initiative or International, sorry, I don't want to get your name wrong, and Economy of Francesco and that, we can work more on this together, sort of have a more complete answer. So I think it's great in this first webinar for me that you asked this question. So.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Rabbi, do you want to add a word or?
No, agree.
Okay, so we go on to...
For me, the answer about the question, what's happened right now, is who is managing that is the market. And this is the problem.
And I think also Helen's answer or touch upon the financial and the real economic sphere, I think was already pointing in that direction. But as Sedgwick said, I think this is something that, we definitely need to keep our eyes on. Lester, I am passing on the word to you.
Yes, I kind of resonate with what our fellow said before from India, because, for example, I think I was reading once that the Catholic Church shows us a lot of land. So what do we do with the land that we own? So I was a member of a religious congregation in the past. So we have in Washington, D.C. a property that few lands that were wasting, they were in the middle of the city. So there was a project of someone, so they did a community-based garden for the community. So that way the property was being used. And right now there are many initiatives in Africa to teach people how to administer the land, how to be sustainable, so that land is not going to waste. So they are doing a good management of that land. And sometimes the Catholic Church, we don't know how to use those properties. So how do we administer the land that we have? If you think that the Catholic Church were about 1 billion people, so how do we do good use of that land? So that I was thinking about that.
Well, I think, it's great to have this discussion, because I think you're just asking absolutely the right questions. I think this is a kind of frontier issue for the Catholic Church. One of the things that's happening now is the Laudato Si action platform, which you may have seen, which has been a big move of organized by the Dicastery for Promoting Integral Human Development to try to get, it's very nice, they try to use all these biblical numbers. So there's 7 types of actors. There's economic organizations, families, parishes, education, religious communities. I can't remember, but anyway, there's 7 different groups. And then there's 7 objectives. And then it's a 7-year program. And in the last year is the Sabbath year. And there will be a big year of celebration of all the things that have been achieved and all this kind of thing. So Laudato Si Action Platform is trying to create the beginnings of interaction at lots of different levels between groups in the Catholic Church. Another person who's really, really interesting on this is a young woman, so young like you, called Molly Burns. There was a New Yorker profile on her, I don't know, a year and a half ago. But if you put in Molly Burns and New Yorker, you can find her. And she's produced these amazing maps about the property in the Catholic Church. And she's using these very advanced systems with all these kinds of layers in them. So you could look at the land that's owned, that the church owns in a particular area, and you could see, what could you do with this land that might be able to support the pollination of different plants around there, because you can get lots of information on the layers of these maps, which can then show you potential ways of using it that can support sustainable activities, also human social activities. One of the things she's saying is we can see with these maps where the migration pressures are going to be on dioceses in the next 5 to 10 years. We could help the diocese prepare for this, this kind of thing. So I think absolutely what you're saying, Lester, we need to become much more aware of and developing skills to deal with these amazing resources that we have. We could be a leader, just as Pope Francis is being leader in terms of the ideas, we could start to become a leader in terms of the practices as well. There's massive potential there.
Wonderful, thank you very much. And I have a question because I see that nobody's raising their hand. I also don't see anything in the chat. I mean, if there was something which I overlooked, please do raise it. Otherwise, I'm just going to take advantage of being the moderator and putting my questions forward. And they go to both of you. Rabbi, you said that good politics is a spiritual task. And you, Helen, also said that inspiration often comes before it actually enters into theory. And obviously, from a religious perspective, you could argue that, that inspiration might also be like some sort of Holy Spirit eventually that comes down and inspires us or whatever. So I'm just wondering, how does that statement, because I think it was a little bit there in both of your interventions, how does that work in a secular world, or do we need religion at all? Or how should we use religion to make good politics and good economics?
Do you want to say something, Rabbi? I like listening to you. You listen to me. The trouble is we like listening to each other.
No, yes, I have no problem with that. And also before we start with the webinar, also I advise Patrick that is thinking about coming into politics in Germany. And I say that this is a very good idea. Why? Because religious and spiritual people, when come into politics, never need to lose the center. Why we are doing that? It's not because really we believe that we have the power to change. The opposite. Like Francis teaches, is to come into a position to get some power to serve, not to use and to abuse of the power and the representation. Is to take this position and to continue and keep going in the same direction that you really believe in your values, in your theology, and how you can be useful for humankind. The challenge is not how effective you can be in politics. The challenge is how you can keep going in your ethical, spiritual direction and not allow to the politics to change you. And this big challenge can show to the next generation, you, the young people, that it's really possible to be involved in politics to the good will of the humankind, and not to become like us, the politicians, that we don't really give a good example, how we use power and politics. That means we are not in different sides. We are in the same side, but we need to have the decision and the courage to come into politics to change it, not talking, not complaining, not running demonstration on the streets. No, we need to use democracy and the representation to good people involved in new politics.
Okay, I would like to just give two quick answers to Patrick's question. There's a group called Blueprint for Better Business based in UK, and they are trying to show that what they call the wisdom traditions, which includes Catholic social teaching, includes Jewish wisdom, they have several different religious groups connected with it, converges with some of the most modern results coming out of the new sciences like genetics, like behavioral economics we were talking about before, neuroscience, that kind of thing. And sometimes these wisdom traditions are ahead of the sciences, and they can also give us things that we just can't get out of the sciences. You know, one of the things I always say in the meetings when I go to that group is you can't look down a microscope and see human dignity. You can't do an experiment and find human dignity. You know, a scientific approach, at least science as we know it now, can't give us that. And yet human dignity is so important for our lives, for our economies, so there's information, input, and kind of things that we can get from religious traditions that we can't get from science. Okay. The other thing is that they have stood the test of time. They've been here for thousands of years. They've got something in them if they can last this long. You know, there's a kind of resilience in them and a deep wisdom. And then the other thing I would say is we just had a meeting not that long ago, second thing, which was Jeffrey Sachs wanted it, in the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences on Beatitudes and the economy. Most people, it was a pity for me because most people either talked about the economy or they talked about the Beatitudes. Whereas I think the really interesting thing is, how can we put the two of them together? I think your question is trying to say something about that. And what I found looking at things about the Beatitudes was that there was a 1940s book that I found by a Dominican who wrote a book called The Social Implications of the Beatitudes. And he took the first one, so blessed are the poor, and said, if we look at this, we can see that people will care about economic things if they follow this beatitude, but they will care about them in a very different way from if you only think about economic things. So he says it changes the way you care about things. And in fact, if you don't have this dimension, you tend to use badly the economic goods. And we know that, of course, because of the terrible climate crisis that we're in. So we need to, I think, find more ways. We were beginning in that meeting to find more ways to connect more directly the thinking that's coming out of the religious traditions with, you know, technical subjects like economics. And I think it's something we have to carry on doing. You know, your question is very well made. We have some things we can say, but we need to say more.
All right, wonderful. Thank you very much to both of you. Then Sarah next. Sorry if you were if you had your hand up before. I didn't see it, but yeah, Sarah, the floor is yours.
That's right. I'm Sarah. I'm from Malta. My area is on sustainability. I would like to ask a question to Sister Helen because on the point of the church land. Because the idea of utilizing the land of the church is a very good idea, given that the church owns a lot of land. However, like when we see that the church itself has its own hierarchies and different convents and different, you know, orders have their own policies and management. Like, how can we, as young economists, like encourage the church, or what can we do in the situation when in reality it has to come from inside the church rather than, for example, 2 years ago, I helped an order in Malta to utilize their land for immigrants, because we want to have a lot of immigrants being in the middle of the Mediterranean between Africa and Italy. I mean, in line with the Laudato Si, we try to bring funds to help them to utilize the land, but then internally they shut down the idea. So because they're not ready to open the convents to be utilized. So we as young people, we tried our best. We gave volunteer hours but
Well, I mean, I think we have a kind of mismatch between, I think we often find this in the church, that we have great ideas, fantastic ideas, some of the best ideas out there. But I also sometimes think that, you know, Jesus himself said, I didn't come to call the healthy, but the sick. I think a lot of the time in the church, we have people who know they need help, who are damaged in some way, and they know about it, you know, and often they can have difficulty facing up to the full implications of these amazing ideas that we get out of because they want to be protected, you know, they want help, they want the church to help them, not rather than, and so we need to be constantly helping people to move forward. I think one of the crucial things is information, you know, young people, if you could push for formation to be different. I mean, if we have this Faculty of Social Sciences here in the university, the Pontifical University, it is really hard for me to get any religious to come and study here because they only want to do the theology or the philosophy. I mean, of course, that's really important. Nobody's against it, but we need some people in the church who can talk about these things and think about these things and give some leadership on these things, you know? So formation, I think, is a crucial thing. Maybe I would put it the other way around. If you could also find places that are not being used, you know, or places that the religious or the diocese, I mean, maybe go and talk to the bishops, go and talk to the heads of the provincials or the heads of the communities and say, you know, can we help you use something better? You know, I think you might be surprised sometimes what reaction you might get. Whereas if they feel migrants or something are being forced on them, they don't necessarily like it. But if you say, look, you've got these amazing buildings, maybe can we do something to help you use them better? You know, maybe we could organize an art exhibition somewhere, so something that's not too kind of threatening, first of all, and, you know, build a relationship. Remember, we said the bonds are really important. Build a relationship and then see what comes out of it, you know. It's not very fast, I know, and the dangers are big and the needs are quick, but sometimes we need alongside groups that can move faster. If we can move more slowly with some of these groups and build deep relationships, sometimes it can have very profound effects over a medium term, you know?
Thank you.
Okay. All right, wonderful. So there are no more questions here in the group, and I would then like to give the floor to Professor Ugo Mattei, who's full professor of law at the University of Turin, founder of the International University College of Turin, and he has written in particular a lot on the Commons. He won the Eleanor Ostrom Award for the collective governance of the Commons in 2017, has countless publications, books, and he oriented the focus of his research on the study and practice of the Commons after, and this is quite interesting, successfully masterminding a nationwide referendum around 10 years ago against the privatization of water in Italy. And some of his work, like Beni Comuni Manifesto, I hope I pronounced that right with the Italian touch, has generated a lot of attention throughout Europe's social movements. So in that case, I would like to give the floor to Ugo Mattei, and it will be really interesting to see how these three interventions now will match and where they will diverge.
Thank you very much for this invitation. I appreciate it. If you can leave as before, that I can see the people and not my face, I would much prefer, because so if you can put the screen in such a way that I don't see my face. Is there a way to do that? Okay, that's fine. But that's good. So I come to this meeting out of an experience, and which is I worked as an editor of a series of papers of Pope Francis that was published in 2020 in the midst of the pandemic. The book was called The Dictatorship of the Economy, La Dittatura dell'Economia, has been published by Editore Gruppo Bele. And it was basically collecting the series of interventions of the Holy Father in a variety of contexts, mostly in the global South, on the issue of on the preparatory issue of what then became the Laudato Si. So it was basically a series of interventions before the Laudato Si, the ecological encyclic of the Pope, and then there were a couple of interventions after the Laudato Si. Some of those were extremely interesting, very crisp, very solid analysis of the economy from the perspective of someone that basically challenges the foundations of capitalism on the basis of the necessity to put human dignity and humanity first and not capital first, okay? And some of his interventions were also very powerful, and for example, there was one in talking with the workers of a company in Genova, with the trade unions, in which he took a very severe position towards the entrepreneurs, that he said that many times don't work as entrepreneurs, work as profiteers. So he was also using a language pretty solid, okay? I was called to edit these different chapters, and I tried to put each one of his interventions in a context, in a relation with some other thinker, not coming from the Catholic tradition, but rather coming from different backgrounds. And I basically discussed the papers in the light of scholars like Fritz Schumacher, like Hannah Arendt, like Stefano Rodotà, like Adriano Olivetti, or like no, it's been a little bit that I was not pursuing, but in fact, Franz Fanon, about the most critical ones. The book was powerful, and then I wrote an introduction, and my introduction basically was trying to discuss what was the global impact, or the possible global impact, of the vision of the Pope. And I said basically, the Pope is organizing a global vision that is a claim that the globalization of the economy should follow certain kind of rules and certain kind of principles. And I thought that that was a global vision that could be seen as in clear opposition with the global vision of the empire. And so it was the empire saying, the vision coming from the Silicon Valley, the vision coming from financial capitalism, the vision coming from disaster capitalism, all the sort of very globalistic ideas that create some sort of a global set of rules, which are rules that allow basically free competition, the survival of the fittest, and the winner takes all kind of economy. So I said, look, there are these two different models once again, the Pope and the empire. The Pope, which is something that was already a very famous clash, as you guys know, at the beginning of the modern state. during the 30 Years' War, there were these two visions, the imperial vision as opposed to the church vision. And these two visions were struggling for becoming the dominant vision of the world. And they said, well, Pope Francis is actually the best interpreter of a quite ambitious Catholic Church that tries to emancipate the poor, in particular the global South, and challenges capitalism from the perspective of its political economy and its results in massive inequality. Okay, and they was also asking a few questions about how comes that the Laudato Si was received in a kind of lukewarm way by global media. Even if it is a very important document, an encyclic is a letter to the bishops and is a very high-level document in the hierarchy of the sources of canon law. And therefore, it's not that when a pope writes an encyclica, is like when he goes out there to say a few words in a meeting of poor people, or when he goes in a church making his normal sermon. It is a quite well thought document that has force of law as far as the institution of the church is concerned, and as far as the political vision that all the members, I would say, of the church, from the officials to the faithful, should endorse as their own vision. Okay, and they was comparing the relatively lukewarm reaction to the Laudato Si with the very warm and so to say encouraging and almost how to say star creating status of Greta Thunberg and the Friday for Future movement. If you think about it, for a few, now it's been, kind of the pandemic changed a lot the things, and I will get to that particular point because I don't like to talk about old stuff. I prefer to talk about what's going on now. But just to give you the sense of what was my take, Greta Thunberg has been certainly receiving a level of global attention that is not comparable to the one received by a pope. And I was basically saying, well, here is the empire constructing its own enemies, okay, or its own critics. In other words, it's much easier and nicer and easier to deal with a young girl and a movement of young kids that can be easily co-opted within the spectacle of capital, something that has been occurring quite immediately for the whole movement there. Much more difficult is to actually attract or co-opt the Pope in the spectacle. When the Pope says something and when he develops a critique on inequality of that kind of power, it really means something. It really means a claim for global leadership, a claim for a global change, a claim for something that is a fundamental critique of the political economy of neoliberalism, articulated by, and it was said before by Dr. Alford, articulated by the most long-lasting institution, political and legal institution of the world. So we are not talking about, just some kids or some people that are worried about the future of the resilience of the world. We're talking about a very strong institution that introduces in its own values a certain kind of the scandal for the inequality that is plaguing our world, to the point of creating so much of difference between human beings that they don't belong to the same species anymore, because this is really the point, you know. Once the material conditions are so far apart from each other, you can really not consider humans part of the same family. They become basically completely disconnected. It's impossible even to understand for someone that lives like Bill Gates, or even for someone who is a rich guy in the United States, what the life looked like for some peasant in India that struggles to, you know, feed his wife and his children, doing very humble jobs in a level of insecurity that is completely unthinkable, even for probably to any one of us. Okay, so for anybody of us who is here, is as much unthinkable how it can be to live in a slum in the global south, being poor, as it is unthinkable to imagine how it would be to live like Bezos or Bill Gates. Okay, we are talking about levels of creation of the condition of life that are so far apart from each other that end up molding the personalities, and the very recognition of the other as your brother is basically impossible. Okay, so this was the scenario, and I was posing a few questions on that, and I was very happy about the position of the Pope, and I was really kind of hopeful that the vision would be a stroke against neoliberalism. And then, you know, the book was published, and right after that, the pandemic started. And here is where, you know, the whole kind of political condition changed. First of all, the Pope received quite a lot of critique from within the Catholic world. There is, as you know, a quite fierce opposition and a dogmatic and theological struggle going on in the Catholic Church, with a lot of faithful and quite a number of officials that question the very legitimacy of the Pope, as opposed, you know, to because of certain kind of positions, and especially the positions that are more open and more flexible towards the aspects, you know, of diversity and gender and blah blah blah, and so that has created a big struggle between the conservative church and the progressive one. Okay, and this struggle became even stronger after the pandemic. There are very important members of the Catholic Church, as for example, Monsignor Vigano, who was the former Messo Pontificio. I don't know how to translate it in English. Maybe someone can help me. The ambassador of the Pope in Washington, D.C. I guess that's the functional translation. There is probably a term. Who actually took an extremely harsh position against the position of the Pope towards vaccination. As you guys know, the Catholic Church, and Pope Francis in particular, has taken a very mainstream position as far as the vaccination being the only solution, or the most important solution to the pandemic crisis. And that has been something that he never really questioned from the beginning. Probably he never questioned it because it was, from the beginning, it was very difficult to understand the political economy behind the mandate of vaccination. But the truth of the matter is that because the empire, in the sense that I was using before, has endorsed a global policy of compulsory vaccination and of high pressure against those social groups that don't want to be vaccinated. The Pope and the Empire, from this point of view, reached a point of convergence. Okay, so they both decided that it was acceptable to impose the vaccination, and also that it was acceptable to deploy systems of electronic control by the use of the algorithmic algorithms to check and to follow and to introduce models of surveillance of the people to know what is their, so to say, sanitary condition. Okay. Now here I can see a big tension between the economy, the political economy of the Pope until 2020, in which there was a strong and powerful critique of neoliberalism, a critique of neoliberalism based mostly on notions of the commons, for example, on the necessity of putting certain kind of goods and of things beyond the reach of the market in a sort of area in which use value should once again become the model of use rather than exchange value. And in some sense, the idea that certain kind of things that belong to the earth, our common earth, cannot really be privatized, cannot really be used for profit, should actually be cared about in the interest of everybody. Something that is not limited to, as we know very well when we study the commons, is not limited really to the water, the so-called ecological commons, but it is also something that has to be taken seriously as far as the social commons is concerned, as far as those resources that the states and the governments create in order to produce, for example, institutions of welfare, which are particularly important, especially to try to reduce the gap between the rich and the poor, giving some minimum level of decency in the way in which people's rights are supported by material conditions. Okay. Now, this merger of the Pope with the Empire in this sort of global, the book was called The Dictatorship of the Economy. Today would be important to take into consideration the idea of the dictatorship of the pandemic, so to say, of the approach, of the medical approach to the pandemic, and especially of the technological approach to medicine. What has been happening, it has been clearly a single thought that has emerged once again as an approach that we used to know as Siena, there is no alternative, that was typical of the early stage of neoliberalism, was typical of the early stage of neoliberalism, in which common goods and public goods have been absorbed and transformed progressively into capital, to the point of letting institutions, and in particular state institutions, without much resources to deal with the problems of inequality. Okay. Okay, so if I'm out of time, then I stop here. You should have told me how long I had. Okay, I'm sorry. That's will be a matter for another time. But I'm not even halfway through, so sorry about that. You should have told me how long I was supposed to talk. These are important matters, and one should have the time to develop. We're not in a TV show. Okay.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your intervention. I would just like to ask eventually Helen to share her final thoughts, because we'll be going into breakout rooms after that to discuss among our young scholars. So that would be also the point where we would thank our invited guests. So Helen, if you could just briefly share your final thoughts, and then I would pass on the word quickly to Jay as the sort of head of the YSI for a minute, and then back to Rob Johnson to wrap that up, and then we would go into the breakout rooms.
To be honest, Patrick, I would rather let other people speak right now. I think I said a lot of things so far. I know originally we said I would respond to other speakers, but I think it's fine where we are, and let's listen to other people speak. Thank you very much for offering them.
All right, wonderful. So yeah, Jay, and then Rob for a final word.
Well, thanks very much. I think first of all, congratulations for putting these questions in front of us in this manner. I think the format of today's session has been really inspiring and something to follow going forward. And I would like to focus also my remarks on the aspirational nature of the session that we've set out, because we're trying, obviously, when we go into the details and we acknowledge we're humans, and we go into the institutions and how we're doing things, we can always find flaws in everything, and we don't have to look very far. It is very clear. But I think what was clear in the early part of the session is that we need to shift our attention to where our moral compass is, how we can be in service of each other and also of ourselves, to be kind to each other. And I think this is, in some sense, what we're learning from these conversations, because the pace and the complexity of the modern world makes us focus on the obvious, measurable things, and those are the things that become less and less important the more we allow them to govern and become the measure of governance. And I think this is something that we intuitively know is wrong and not complete. And we need to find, as Sister Helen was telling us, the right way of combining these different models together and not letting the wrong one completely dominate other forms. This is not to say that there is some silver bullet out there that we can follow and we can religiously, dogmatically then do that. We are all quite aware in this community that we have to work with many, many different types of people, and listening is the key to this, and understanding and asking the right questions and being morally grounded in these questions is the important thing, and therefore also being connected with our communities and with the concerns is the right approach. And that is to say, there is no obvious answer, but we need to move together in these ways to be able to form a future together. And what I'm really proud of in this initiative here today and in general is that we are forming together a new type of conversation, a new type of approach that allows us to navigate our individual constraints, our individual problems that we have every day, because we have to have a living in all the flawed institutions we're faced with every day, but at the same time have an outlet in these conversations to sort of be grounded again, reminded again how we need to go forward. So I just see this as a start, and thank you everybody for doing that. Congratulations.
Wonderful, thank you. So Rob, it's now on to you to dismiss us into our breakout sessions.
Very good. Well, I want to suggest to you all that this is not merely about curiosity. There is a purpose along with this innovation. I think the world right now comprehends, in light of the evidence of the pandemic, the specter of climate change, and some of the other distortions that are quite painful to experience as a human being, that we run the risk that fear and what you might call denigration leads to deeper and deeper despair and makes us susceptible to an authoritarian response. And so I think as the Pope is leading, he is a beacon, as all of you move forward to embrace the challenge and be constructive and understand that you're the leaders of the future. You're not just thinkers about the future, is very important. As I was listening today, I heard a song that I often heard at the beginning of the pandemic about Psalm 40, by the band U2. And he is beckoning for help, the kind of help that Pope Francis is providing, and that all of you are joining into, and our panelists today contributed to quite formidably, and for me very satisfying to listen to. And what he says in the lyrics of the song, I waited patiently for the Lord. He inclined and heard my cry. He lifted me up out of the pits, out of the miry clay. He set my feet upon a rock and made my footsteps firm. Many will see and hear. I will sing a new song. I will sing a new song. You composers, head out to your breakout rooms. Thank you for allowing me to be with you, to experience this, and I wish you all the best and look forward to the next chapter Patrick and your team will bring forward in, I guess, about a month's time.
Thank you very much.
Bye for now.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So, yes, we will be, Helen, we also, I think it's fair enough to say in the name of YSI, thank you for your participation. You've been with us long enough, and you've greatly inspired us talking about inspiration. And we will be putting an essay together at the end of these 3 sessions that we then want to submit to the Pope. And this is also why we now go into the breakout rooms to share our thoughts and then kind of try to synthesize all of that. But we will definitely use your input as well as that of the other speakers. And we will be going now into, I would say, 3 rooms eventually for 10 minutes. So we try to keep it brief because we have been using quite a bit of time. So if I could just ask, I'm not sure who's the administrator here to set up the 3, okay, perfect. The 3 breakout rooms, and then you have to click on, go back to the main hall and not exit the meeting for the final wrap up. So now 10 minutes of breakout discussions.
Okay, I will create it. We see you there.
Who were asking the questions in between, which is a question of power relations. And then the second point, which was highlighted, was the question of values, right? What Helen then also raised, give them another purpose, another objective, and then they will start thinking differently, which I think is another quite interesting approach in terms of thinking about the common home. And then the third point was, which Georgette nicely brought out, which was also in the interventions, the point on divisions, right? Because currently the world, every society literally is deeply, deeply divided. And a home, I think that's a quote that I might be using, Georgette, a home is not about division. And I think that was also what Rabbi Sergio in particular wanted to stress, but also Helen. That we're kind of all in that together. We're all the same but different. So yeah, these are the 3 points that our group brings to the final essay. So yeah, next breakout room.
Hi everyone. Our breakout room highlighted especially 4 points actually. Also, this difference between home and house, and how it is, how we can understand it in the administration of the common good, the common house. Also, rethinking competition and cooperation. This was also a point highlighted, especially by Jay. Diversity, also brought by Sister Helen. Not only diversity of regions and religions and etc., but also diversity of models and having a pluralist view of the economy and the administration of the common goods, and also acting in community level, how to integrate especially the community needs into everything we were talking about. So needs that come from the community needs and from different locations. So basically, that was the 4 points I thought very interesting, and it do help us a lot to write the answers for Pope Francis.
Thank you, Patrick and Mariana, and I will share the different ideas that we share in breakout room number 1, basically summarized in 3 points as well. So the first point was this reality, and that we listen today a lot of the current situation. Like, I think that we as young people and we as society, we want to understand what is the real situation, like what is happening right now, like how is the goods really distributed and managed. The second point was related with the spiritual aspect as well on the models, and connected with point number 3, that is like acting in the community level. So for us, like, it was really important, like this point that Sister Helen was raising on not only thinking in models and in the integrality of that, but also like having these goals that are common to all and that are bringing us together, no matter from which like discipline or specific sector we are coming from. I don't know if I'm forgetting any point, like please, like the others from the breakout room, if you want to add like something.
Yes, I just want to add that we talk a little bit about, when you were mentioning the goods, we were talking about the corporations. So it's very important to be aware that today many corporations have more power than in small countries. So we have Facebook, Microsoft, all those big corporations. So they have a lot of power, and it looks like they don't have limits. So in the United States, they were struggling with Facebook and the role they have in the election. So right now, Congress is trying to put some limits to Facebook power. But what are the ethical guidelines of those leader of corporation? And many times the young people are trying to imitate those big examples. So what is the example they are proposing to the young people? Become rich, and then what do you do with that? You have no limit. No one can tell you what to do because you are the CEO of that big corporation. So it's a very important ethical question.
Mm-hmm. And it actually links perfectly into our next session, which will be on the 10th of March. And there we will be discussing the questions of, well, which laws do we actually need to put the economy at the service of fragility, which is then, of course, question, or I think at least, I don't know what we'll be talking about, but it is, of course, a question about power and how do we regulate businesses and the global economy so that it works for all. So if you want, you can put that date in your diary. We'll, of course, advertise it via the YSI platform, via other channels, Twitter or email or whatever. We'd be very, very happy to have you on board for our next session and continue to contribute to that essay that we would like to submit to the Vatican. I don't know if there is anything else that, Mariana, you might want to add.
I just would like to thank you, everyone. And this will be a very rich experience for everybody. And I think I'm very glad for this webinar. And I would like to invite you to invite friends and colleagues, and who do you think that wanted to be part of this discussion, because we want the diversity inside these answers. So please, we would like to see you on the next webinars. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you so much, everyone. Take care, have a good day.
Bye. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you to the IUC students for coming. I see you. Take care, bye.